And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello and welcome to Alaska Weather. This is our aviation segment. I'm meteorologist David Kramer here on September 8th. Starting off, we'll take a look at some of our satellite imagery. We're going to watch two features move through the area. The first is heading into the Bering Sea. The system is right now tracking through the northern portions of the Bering Sea, but as we move into tomorrow, we do expect it to move southeast through the Bering Sea towards the Alaska Peninsula, bringing in some flying weather concerns as it moves through. We also have a system moving up from the North Pacific into the Gulf of Alaska, already bringing some cloud cover to much of the southern portions of the state, but that will have an impact tomorrow as well. So as we look into flying weather for Saturday morning, we can see that Gulf system bringing in some IFR conditions to the eastern and northern portions of the Gulf, and NVFR out to southeast Alaska as well as south central. VFR conditions through the interior, starting to see some IFR as we get up along the Arctic coastline. Our other system in the Bering Sea bringing widespread IFR conditions to the Bering and Aleutian Islands, not quite making it to southwest Alaska, however. As we move into Saturday afternoon, some of those MVFR conditions will make it to southwest Alaska, but out for the Bering Sea and Aleutians, primarily IFR conditions at southern locations, clearing up as we get farther to the north. Out over mainland Alaska, we are going to see a mixture of VFR and MVFR conditions for south central, the interior, and up along much of the Arctic coastline, where we will drop down to IFR conditions right along the coast. Other system is starting to weaken here, but we are still seeing some IFR conditions out by the Yakutat area, with MVFR out for much of the Panhandle. And Sunday morning, continuing to see those IFR conditions out towards the Yakutat area down in the eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, but much of southeast clearing up to VFR conditions Sunday morning. Southwest Alaska starting to see some IFR conditions there. Interior continuing to be primarily VFR, but MVFR conditions all up the west coast of the state, and continuing to see IFR conditions along the Arctic coastline. Down in the Bering Sea, some isolated areas of IFR, and then down by the western Aleutians, some IFR out there as well. Sunday afternoon, we're going to see those IFR conditions in the Bering move over the Pribilof Islands, as well as extend out over the central Aleutians to include the western Aleutians. Along the west coast of the state, widespread MVFR conditions are expected, with much of those reaching into the interior and south central as well. Will still be some pockets of VFR down through the interior down to south central, but primarily MVFR. Up along the Arctic coastline, mixture of IFR out west to VFR conditions out east. Then finally down for the Panhandle, primarily VFR, but there are areas of IFR right off the coastline for the eastern portions of the Gulf, extending into the northern Gulf as well. Taking a look at our passes for tomorrow, Anaktuvik is expected to be VFR throughout the day Saturday. Adigan also expected to be VFR throughout the day. Lake Clark and Merrill will both start off VFR, drop down to MVFR in the afternoon. Rainy Pass will also start off VFR, dropping down to MVFR conditions. Windy Pass should be MVFR throughout the day Saturday, as well as at Isabel Pass. Mentasta looks to be VFR throughout the day, and Tenino will be MVFR all day on Saturday. Portage starting off IFR, improving to marginal conditions in the afternoon. And then finally for Chilkoot and White, both expected to be MVFR throughout the day Saturday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we do have some warmer air moving in to areas for southeast Alaska, some colder air as we get farther to the north and out to the east, with freezing levels dropping down to as low as 4,000 feet over western Alaska, but then picking back up with some warmer air out by the Aleutian Islands up to as high as 14,000 feet by the western Aleutians. Taking a look at our icing out over mainland Alaska, southwest Alaska, we are expecting to see some icing above 3,000 feet there. Also above 4,000 feet for south central Alaska. Then up through the central western interior, out by the Norton Sound area, we do expect icing to be above 6,000 feet. Taking a look at our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet out over the eastern portions of the Gulf, up to as high as 130 knots out of a southerly direction, dropping down as we move into the eastern portions of the mainland. 60 knots out by the Kotzebue Sound area. And then as we look out over the Bering Sea, we have jet moving in at 95 knots out of the west for the western Bering, becoming more northwesterly as we get by the eastern Aleutians and Pribilof Islands, up to as high as 115 knots out of that northwest direction. Down to 9,000 feet, we have much of our circulation is around the low that's out by the Alaska Peninsula for tomorrow. We're going to see winds up to as high as 50 knots out of the northwest for the Pribilof Islands, 60 knots as we get south of the Aleutians out of that northwesterly direction, but flow becoming much more southerly out over the mainland and southeast Alaska. Going to see some stronger winds by southeast, 45 to 50 knots out of that southerly direction, 40 knots over much of south central area out of a southerly direction, and then southeast over the northwest portions of the mainland, 35 knots expected. For 3,000 feet, we have some stronger winds up along the Arctic coastline, 35 to 40 knots there out of a primarily easterly direction. Some stronger winds for southeast Alaska out of a southerly direction, 50 knots, strongest on the Gulf side and then dropping down in the inside waters. Out over the Bering Sea, we have some northwesterly winds out over the Aleutians, around 40 knots expected. For our turbulence, all along the Aleutians below 3,000 feet, getting up to 4,000 feet as we get by the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay area. Out over mainland Alaska in the interior, below 4,000 feet in the northern central interior, below 8,000 feet as we get closer to the Alaska Range, and then along the North Gulf Coast down through southeast Alaska below 6,000 feet for turbulence is expected.